This video will introduce you to the basics of LS2 Preferences. Because we're going over the basics, we will not be looking at every button in LS2 Preferences. LS2 Preferences is a module that's made for directors or managers to make changes to their library's system. When you log into LS2 Preferences, you'll see that there are 5 sections. Location Setup covers a lot of the general settings for a library. Security covers library staff and what each staff member is able to do based on their login information. Types and Codes covers titles and items within a library and circulation rules. Borrowers covers borrower types and what each borrower is able to do. And System Settings has some other general settings. As in other LS2 modules, we have the help file at the top right corner of the page. In LS2 Preferences, the help file is slightly different in that it will bring up the page that you're already on directly in the help file. So for example, if I select Types and Codes, holds routing, then select Help, this will take me directly to Types and Codes holds routing. It also opens in a new tab, so I can quickly close that tab and get right back to where I was before. If I want to get back to the home page, I can just select the LS2 Preferences button at the top left of my screen, and that will take me back to the home page. Let's take a brief look at Location Setup. The first thing you'll see under Location Setup is the calendar. This is where you set your library's typical schedule for each week, and you can also set any days off that you have, such as holidays. Next up is Defaults. Under Defaults, you'll first select your library's location, and then you can select several different settings for the location, such as when the fiscal year begins, when holds need to be picked up by, and more. Block rules are related to responsible parties, so parties that have typically a parent with child borrowers linked to their account. Fines and overdues is where the default fines rules are set. Notifications is where general notification settings are set, so in this case, all new borrowers would be set to receive paper notices, but you can change it so that all new borrowers by default receive text message, email, or telephone notices, and then settings can be changed borrower by borrower from LS2 staff. Finally, the password section has override passwords for both anyone and a supervisor. Going back to Location Setup, we can next see General Info. This just has the general information about a library, including its address, phone number, and other basic information. The next section, Groups, has location groups and statistical groups. Location groups is a way to group different libraries within the same system, so such as all elementary schools in one library system or particular branches of a library, and statistical groups are a way to group holdings codes together and then run reports on those holdings codes. For example, a library could have a statistical group that shows all juvenile book collections together in one statistical group, and then they'd be able to run a report on all of their juvenile books at once. Next, Notice Text is where you can set up your notices that will be printed through LS2 reports. And finally, Printing is the area where you can set up your labels, so your spine labels, and also your slips. So let's take a quick look at spine labels. You will select a location and then whether you want spine labels to be formatted with a single line or multiple lines, and how you want line breaks to happen. Under Slip Setup, you can set up your slips for each location that will be printed. So first select your location, then the type of slip, so you can select Arrived Hold, Borrower Payment Receipt, Borrower Items Out, or Checkout. And then each slip has at least a header, body, and footer, and some also have a body header and a body footer. So once you've selected the section that you'd like to edit, you can edit it below as long as Customize this slip is selected. You can enter labels and data. Labels are like here, where just asterisks have been typed, and data is like here under Location Name, where the system will pull in information. Let's look at the Borrower Items Out body. So first we have the title, and that is a label, so that has been typed out. And then the title subfield A is the data, so that will be pulled from the system. Once you've got your slip set up, click on Print Preview at the top of the screen, and you can see a sample slip that has dummy information. So it's always going to have Musselman High, Leon J. Smith Jr., and Anastasia Wood, but you can at least see how things are set up so that you can make sure that everything looks the way that you want it to look. Now let's take a look at the security section. This is where a library's employees and volunteers, if they have any, will be set up. All employees and volunteers will be listed under users, and they will receive roles. Under roles, the library can select what each role is able to do. So let's start with users. Here we can see that each user has a username, a space for their first and last name, email address, and then as we look across the screen, we can see that they have different roles. So we can see their role for LS2 staff. We can also see their role for LS2 cataloging, LS2 preferences, and LS2 reports. So each of these roles will show just how much a person is able to do. For example, under LS2 cataloging, you can see several cataloging administrators who would have rights to do anything in LS2 cataloging, whereas this inventory user could only inventory, and this user without any LS2 cataloging role would not be able to log into LS2 cataloging. At the top of the page, and at the top of many pages that you'll see in LS2 Preferences, there are buttons including Add, Filter, Refresh, and Batch Edit. So if you'd like to find all of the users in your system who have the cataloging administrator role, you can select Filter, and then LS2 cataloging role equals, and then cataloging administrator. Select Filter, and close the filter, and now you can see all of the users that have the cataloging administrator role. To clear a filter, just select Refresh. Next, you can also batch edit users. Select Batch Edit, and then you can decide how quickly a borrower times out. So when someone is in LS2 staff and they have a borrower pulled up on their screen but their computer is idle, how many minutes will it take before that borrower is cleared for privacy reasons? You can also select Use Red Comment Bubble, which shows an LS2 staff, and that's where the comment on a borrower is shown with a red bubble instead of a white or light gray one. If you'd like to add a new user to the system, simply select Add, and that user will be added with the information selected. Let's go through all of the information with an already created user. To do so, I'm going to select the paper and pencil icon beside a user and select Edit. And then I can see that some things are editable and some are not. So once a user's username is set, it's going to stay that way, and there's really no way to change it other than deleting that user and then recreating them. Next, a user's password can be changed, but the little lock icon needs to be selected in order to change that password. We can set the first name, last name, and email for the user and select which login locations they should be able to log into. So only one location can be selected here, or you can select multiple locations. Next, under LS2 staff, you can select what their staff role should be. This is going to be library dependent, as libraries can create and edit their own roles, but to see some of TLC's suggestions for getting started, go to the Help file and scroll down to LS2 staff. There you can see the 3 initial roles available of Circulation Administrator, Circulation User, and Circulation Volunteer. And if you click into LS2 staff permissions, you can see more information about what each of these roles can do. We'll do the same thing under LS2 Preferences and LS2 Cataloging, so we'll select whether there should or shouldn't be a role. Under Cataloging, we'll also select a role and a default location, which just means that this is the first location that the user will be signed into, and then they can change to any other locations that they're allowed to sign into from there. And finally, for LS2 Reports, this one works a little bit differently than the other modules because LS2 Reports is powered by IBM Cognos. TLC purchases user licenses and author licenses through IBM, so libraries cannot have unlimited users with reports roles here. The number of total users available will vary depending on the library, as they each select how many reports users they want to have. Then a user can have no role selected, be a reports author, a reports configuration user, or a reports user. Now let's take a look at roles. When you select roles, you'll then need to select a module. Let's start by looking at LS2 cataloging. After selecting your module, you'll have a drop-down that has several different roles. You may see a different number of roles here or roles with different names, just depending on how your system was set up. So for each of these roles, you can select and then you can enable or disable permissions below. This impacts what each user is able to do. So if someone is assigned to the cataloging user, for example, here in my system, they will be able to create local authorities, but they will not be able to verify local authorities. So you can go through your permissions and you can change to enable or disable permissions at any time you'd like. You can also copy to a new role if you'd like to add another role. So let's say, for example, that I have these few users set up and I would like to add another cataloging role with some more permissions. So I have a cataloger in my library who I'd like to have a little bit more ability to do things than some of my other catalogers. So I'm going to select cataloger and select copy to new role. And what this will do is it will keep all of the permissions enabled and disabled the exact same way. And then when I copy this role, I can just change any of the permissions that I'd like. So now I can say, actually, I want this cataloger 2 role to be able to verify local authorities, for example. And you may notice that I have your changes have been saved immediately at the top of the screen. So this will just immediately save as you make changes. If you'd like to delete a role, you can just select that role and then select delete role and easily delete it. By setting different roles, you'll be able to select how much you want people to do. So for example, here we have an inventory user in LS2 cataloging, and you can see that many of their roles are disabled, and the only thing that this person can do if they're signed into an inventory user is that they can inventory. You can edit roles in this same way for the modules of LS2 cataloging, staff, and preferences. So we suggest always having an administrator that has rights to everything and everything is enabled. And then you can select other roles and edit other roles so that they have the permissions that you'd like for that role to have. Now let's take a look at the types and codes section. When we went through security, that went over everything related to our users or the employees and volunteers in our library. In types and codes, we'll look at things related to our titles and our items in our library, such as our holdings codes and the rules that they follow. You can use types and codes to set up academic reserves, and you can also set up each holdings code in your library system. All holdings codes for all locations will show here. If you want to filter down to just your own library, you can select filter, and then you could select location equals and select your own location. Then select filter and close the filter. To clear off your filter, just select refresh. You could also use the filter to look for something like all holdings codes that have juvenile in the long description. So I'll go to long description contains JUV and then filter. And now when I close the filter, I can see in my long description, I've got juvenile and JUV in long descriptions. Let's take a look at an actual holdings code. So you can select add if you'd like to add a new one. And then you can also edit holdings codes, make a copy of them if you'd like to copy to create another holdings code that is very similar to the one you're copying, but slightly different. And you can delete holdings codes from here. I'm going to select edit so that you can see everything about this holdings code. First, the holdings code cannot be changed once it's set. The first letter or letters will represent the location. So in this case, the Taylor branch always has holdings code starting with G. And then the short description will follow that. So that's why this one is GAF for Taylor and then adult fiction. The long description will have the name of the holdings code, and then there are several checkboxes that you can select. If you want to create a holdings code for titles or items that do not circulate, you can select non-circulating. And you can also select Hide from Public if those titles or items are things that you don't want to have showing in your pack. Then they'll only show in LS2 Staff and Cataloging. You can also decide things like if you want local holds to be filled first for this holdings code, if you have floating collections, and if you want to allow automatic renewals. For call number types, you can select Dewey, LC, or non-standard, and retain history for up to, and you can select 0, 1, 2, or 3 transactions, and this will show in LS2 Staff whenever you select an item in that holdings code. You'll be able to see the last, in this case, 3 patrons who borrowed that particular item. At the bottom of the screen, you can decide if there are any charges related to items in this holdings code. So if they have a rental charge, if there's a rental renewal charge, and then finally the replacement cost. If an item is lost and you charge for lost items, the system will first look at LS2 cataloging and see what the price is on that particular item. If there's no price there, then the system will look at the holdings code's default price to charge for the item. If there's no price for the item in LS2 cataloging and there's nothing in the holdings code either, then the system will finally look into location setup and defaults and look at the default lost fine for any item in the library in general. When you're finished, you can always select Save, and you can move between holdings codes by clicking Previous and Next at the top of the screen. You can also go back to your main holdings codes page from there. Next, in types and codes, we have holds routing. This is for libraries with multiple locations, and this is how you set the order in which holds will be fulfilled. So we have selected Taylor here under our location. And for Taylor, holds will fill from the Taylor location first, so its own location. Then holds for Taylor will look to the Washington branch and then the Jefferson branch. You can also add non-supply locations for any locations that you do not want to pull from to fill Taylor holds. So for example, if I don't want any items coming from Washington to fill holds at Taylor, then I can select Remove and add it into the non-supply locations. I can also change the order of the locations on the supply locations list as well. To add a location from your non-supply location, simply select the location you want it to fill holds for, select the location, and then click Add. Remember that this is a location-specific page, so you'll need to set this for each of the locations in your system. If you've selected this box, Fill holds from any location without regard to location order, then the boxes below will be grayed out since we're not really regarding the location order there. Again, remember to always save if you've made any changes. Now let's take a look at rules. This is where you'll set your circulation rules under Rules Profiles, and then in Rules Link Manager, you'll link each circulation rule to a combination of a holdings code and a borrower type. So each holdings code and borrower type combination gets linked to the rule that you want it to follow. Therefore, you can have some borrower types following different rules than others for the same holdings codes. Let's go to Rules Profiles first. The Rules Profiles page looks similar to other pages we've seen on LS2 Preferences, where we have Add, Filter, and Refresh at the top of the screen. Again, you can use Filter similarly, where you have equals, contains, begins with, or ends with, and you'll be able to filter and then reset your filters and refresh. Each of your rules profiles will be listed below, and we suggest naming your rules profiles in a way that will make them easy to find when you go into the Rules Link Manager, because in Rules Link Manager, you'll just have one big list of rules profiles, so you want to be able to easily identify what each rules profile means. Let's go into the 14-day new rules profile so you can see everything that can be set from there. I'm going to select Edit. When you open the rules profile, you'll see the profile name. You can also see whether the due date is in days, hours, or minutes. If you change these, then they'll change the boxes below. In this example, we have a checkout limit of 3, and as long as this cumulative checkout limit is deselected, a patron can check out 3 items from each collection that's following this rules profile. So since this is my new profile, if I have adult fiction, new books, and adult nonfiction new books following this rule, a patron could check out 3 of each. If I select cumulative checkout limit, they can check out 3 total. Next, we have our checkout period, and for checkout due time, if you're using due date intervals and days, we suggest checking the checkout due time and setting it as 11:59 p.m. so that patrons have until the end of the day to return their items. Otherwise, their items will be due at the time that they checked them out. Below, we have a renewal limit, a renewal period, and renewal due time, and you can also allow automatic renewals if you'd like. And below that, if you're fining, then you can set your overdue fines. For due date intervals that are in days, you can select all days to fine for every day, business days only to only fine on days when the library is open, and all days no nearby closed to fine for days when the library is open, but it wasn't closed the day before. So if you were closed on Sunday and someone returned something on Monday, they won't be charged for that Sunday. The following 3 are for due date intervals in hours or minutes, and they work essentially the same way as the ones above. So all periods works like all days, open periods only works for business days only, and all periods but for greater than 1 day is very similar to all days no nearby closed. You can then set your overdue fine amount for each day, or if you're doing due date intervals in hours and you have open periods only, then you can set overdue fine amount for every so many hours. Below that, you can set the max fine per transaction, override due dates, and override grace periods. Finally, you can decide for items in the collections following this rule profile. Do you want patrons to be able to place holds in pack? Do you want staff members to place holds in staff? Or both, or neither? On the rules profile screen, you can also compare all of your rules profiles. So just scroll across and you can look at everything that's set for each rules profile here. Remember that under location setup and defaults, we set a default rules profile. So anytime a new holdings code is added to your collection, that holdings code and all borrower types will automatically follow the default rules profile. However, you can always change it under Rules Link Manager. So once you have all of your rules profiles set up, go into Rules Link Manager and set which combinations of borrower types and holdings codes you want to each rule here. Start by selecting the profile that you'd like to edit or add things to. So we've selected 14-day new at the top. Then on the left side of the screen, you can see everything that is linked to that rule. On the right side of the screen, you can see everything that is not linked to that rule and what rule it is linked to instead. If you're working at a multi-site library, I suggest starting by filtering your location so that you only see the location you want to work with. You can do this on both sides of the screen. Now, for example, I can see that in my Taylor New Book Adult Fiction collection, all of these borrower types are linked to the 14-day new rule. I can see on the right side everything that's not linked to it. All combinations of borrower types and holdings codes must always be linked to exactly one rule. So what this means is that initially those combinations are going to be linked to the default rules profile. Then if you want to change it, you don't remove it, you simply add it to the rule that you want it to be added to, and that will pull it off of the old rule. So for example, if I want this Taylor Adult Fiction online borrower registration combo to follow the new 14-day new book rule instead of getting 28 days for checkout, then I'll just select it here and I'll click Assign Checked. Then I'll be asked for confirmation, select yes, and now it's been changed. So I never had to pull this combination of Taylor Adult Fiction Holdings Code and Online Borrower Registration borrower type off of its old rule. I just added it to its new rule, and that'll automatically take it off the rule that it was on before. So always start by selecting the rule that you want to add things to, and then move anything onto it that you would like to add to it, and those things will automatically be taken off of their old rules. Next, under types and codes, we have special statuses. These special statuses can be set for check-in on LS2 staff. So if you want to mark something as lost or missing on LS2 staff upon check-in, add the special statuses here, and then you can select special status and select which one from a drop-down menu in LS2 staff. When you go to add a special status, you'll see that you need to either select lost or missing, and then you can add a description to that status, which will be what you see here. If you look at the help file, TLC recommends that you create modified missing statuses when you expect the item to be returned to circulation, and modified lost statuses when you do not expect the item to be returned. After special statuses, we have stats-only collections. Stats-only collections are for things that you want to run stats on, but you're not checking any items out. So for example, here we have program attendance. So if you want to keep a count of how many people have attended programs, and you could even break this down and have particular programs listed, then you can add those to stats-only collections, and then you'll be able to run reports on those things. In LS2 staff, you can create a stats-only collection such as this one, and then under checkout, you'll select stats only, and you can select which of your items you'd like to add stats to and how many. So for example, if you have 15 people who just attended a program, you can enter 15, and then that's just going to disappear. It's not going to go into your checkouts because there's nothing being checked out that needs to be returned. The system's just keeping stats on that so that you can run reports on those items. Note that in stats-only collections, these are location specific, so each of your locations can have their own stats-only collections. Next up, let's look at types. Here you'll have charge types, and these are charges that you can set for patrons from the charges section. So you'll bring up a patron's account and then go to the charges section, and at the bottom you'll have a button that says add fee. From that add fee section, you can select one of the charges that you have added into your charge types list and then enter an amount. If you'd like to make sure that something is always charged the same way, then you could even add an amount to the description. Once again, you can add, filter, and refresh just like on other pages. When you add your charge type, you'll need to select a short description for this, as this is limited in characters, and then in the long description you can describe what this actually is. That covers the types and codes section, so let's go back to the LS2 Preferences main page. Next up, we have borrowers. In the borrower section, just like it sounds, you'll set everything up related to your borrower types. So first, let's look at borrower fields. Borrower fields can be added for any information that you'd like to keep on your borrowers that is not in the automatic information that's added. So when you go into LS2 staff and the extra info tab of the borrower info section, these are the items that you'll be able to see there. Everything can either be a drop-down menu with selections, or it can be a short answer text field. Let's look at LS2 Preferences, and I'll show you how to add a new borrower field. Start by clicking Add. Then we're going to select our field type, so we can do drop-down or text box. Let's start with text box, where all you need to do is enter a field name, and then in LS2 staff, you'll be able to enter information in a short answer format. Select Save, and then your new text box has been added. Now let's edit this one to make it into a drop-down. So I'm going to select the Edit button and change it from text box to drop-down, and then Save. And now you may have noticed that I've got a new plus sign on the left side. This is what I select in order to add my drop-down selections. So since I'm entering a field where I want to know whether someone is a resident or not, I'm going to add yes and no as the options. So first I'll select Add Value, and then enter a value and a label. The label is what you're going to see in LS2 staff. Select Save, and you can continue adding as many values as you need. Once again, I'm going to select Save, and then I can click the minus button on the side and collapse my new drop-down field. Now my field is ready for LS2 staff. Next, under Borrower is Borrower Notifications. For the first section that says all, you'll want to leave everything here alone, and if you need to make changes, then we always suggest contacting TLC to make sure that any of these things are changed correctly. You can select delay notifications if you'd like to make sure that your borrowers are not getting notifications that are automated notifications overnight. So if a borrower has something that's overdue, they won't get notices like that overnight. But if they select something like forgot password, then those are borrower initiated notifications and they will still get those. So let's say, for example, that we don't want our borrowers to get notifications from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. So I'm going to select pause notifications at 9 p.m. And then, since I don't want them to get notifications until 8 a.m., I'll say resume after 11 hours. So this just keeps borrowers from getting any notifications during the night. You can also select your send interval and retry interval. So if things are not going through, how often do you want them to be sent again? And a max number of retries. The friendly courtesy notice buffer, it should be a negative number so that it says, for example, here, 1 day before something happens, the person's going to get a notification. Then under email, you can set up the text for all of these notices. So you'll set the subject and the body of your emails here. Note that at the top of the screen, you may see email, SMS, or both, depending on your library's settings. In Borrower Purge, you can decide to clean out your borrowers based on how long their card's been expired or when their last activity date was. So for example, here I have expiration date selected. So then I can select any borrowers whose card expired on or before a certain date are going to be purged from the system. So to do so, I will start by clicking on the month and the year, and then I'll click again on the year so that I can choose what year I want to purge borrowers from. Then select a date. And borrower types, so do you want to purge all borrower types or only specific ones? Select what location or locations you'd like to purge borrowers from. And then you can decide, do you want to delete borrowers with a blocked status, yes or no? And do you want to delete borrowers with total charges less than or equal to a certain amount? Then when you select preview, the system will show you any borrowers that are going to be purged. You can also go into history and see all of your purges that have been completed in the past. Let's take a look at borrower types. On borrower types, you can set up every different type of card you'd like borrowers to be able to get. So again, we have add, filter, and refresh at the top of the page. You can also select multiple borrower types here and then edit a few things in batch. So when you select edit, everything's going to be locked, but you can on some fields select the unlock button and then change those fields. So for example, if I wanted to change the checkout limit for all of these borrower types, I'd unlock it and then type in a new checkout limit. Let's go back to borrower types, and I'm going to just edit one borrower type so that you can see all of the things that you can fill out for that borrower type. Once the borrower type's code has been set, that cannot be changed. So if you really need to change it, you'll have to completely remove that borrower type and add it back in. Then your description should show what exactly that borrower type means. And there's a message that you can keep for yourself just here in Preferences. This will not show in LS2 Staff or PAC. Then you can decide if you'd like to automatically update the borrower type. So for example, if you have age-based borrower types and you'd like to change them based on age, or if you'd like to change your OBR borrower types upon first check-in, or if you have a limited borrower type for patrons based on their first so many days or months at the library, you can also set that. And then those borrowers will be automatically changed to the next borrower type that you select. At the bottom, you can decide on checkout blocks. So how many items can this borrower type have checked out at a time? What is their overdue limit and what is their fine limit before their account is blocked and they can't check anything else out? You can also decide if you want to override anything that you set previously under location setup and defaults. So do you want to override card expiration or expiration notification, the number of grace period and days that this borrower type gets, or a due no later than date for them? Next, under General, you can decide on hold priority. So if you want all borrower types in your library to have the same hold priority, just leave this alone, but you can also change hold priority if you'd like for certain borrower types to receive holds more quickly than others. You can also select the max number of holds that a borrower can have on their account and the max fine balance that they can have. Finally, at the bottom, you can decide if you want to have a recurring charge for a borrower type. So if, for example, you have a non-resident, like I have in this example, here we're set to charge the non-resident borrowers $5 every year. You can also select a charge type for there, which was from the types that we set up a few minutes ago, and a comment to be added for that charge type, and when you want that charge to be added to their accounts. Once again, under borrower types, you can scroll down and scroll the bar across so that you can see all of the information about your different borrower types at once. Finally, we're going to take a very quick look at system settings. So in system settings, you can set up import and export settings. Those are for LS2 cataloging. You can configure label stock, so this is where you will select which labels your library is using for printing from LS2 cataloging. Under the LS2 launch page section, you can set any links that you'd like to have for staff at the bottom of the launch page. You can set a staff message at the top of the launch page, and you can decide which pack each location is mapped to. Next, you can set up online borrower registration and determine which fields are required and not required for online borrowers. There's also the option to hide some of the fields, so if you don't want online borrower registration to show some of those fields to borrowers, you can hide them. Other system settings has a few settings such as what theme your LS2 staff is in, so the color scheme, and what you want to have showing in your pack based on item status. Under Purge, you can purge loan and fine history, and under Search Profiles, you can set up Z3950 search profiles for LS2 cataloging. This covers the basics for LS2 preferences. There were several sections that we skipped over or went through very quickly, so if you would like more information on those sections, please look at LS Community to watch more detailed videos on some of these sections.